Jeff mentioned history, and I have recently written some poems with a historical bent, as it were. One of them I may read in a minute, but the real problem is that we can't cope with history. This is particularly true in Ireland, of course, where we have an awful lot of history and we can't cope with it, and we enjoy it a lot. One here, yes I can, called Finding Proteus. And for many years I wanted to write a poem about the moment in the Odyssey when Odysseus, he'd been told various things. He wants to get home to his own country. And he's constantly being told, well, you can't do it until you've done this, this, and this. And one of the things he has to do is to grab hold of the god of change, Proteus. Actually, is it Menelaus who has to do that? I think it is Menelaus. It's somebody else who has it, but it's the same trope. You must grab the god, and then he'll start changing into all kinds of things. A fish, a lion, a fire, a wind. But if you keep on holding on to him, he will return to his home, to his original shape. Now, this seems not a bad image for history, except that Proteus may not be as easy to manage as all that. In this poem, Proteus has changed, in fact he's changed sex. He's become Mrs. Proteus, or Dr. Proteus actually. He's also got a PhD. She has also got a PhD. And who she actually is my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law was famous for taking things that you had, things like a gold watch or a nice necklace, and she would put them away safely. And when you asked her for them again, she'd say, oh, don't ask me for it now. And this actually, when I thought about it, seemed like not a bad image of what history is actually like. Tusk, which is mentioned in the first line, is a rather small hill in the middle of Ireland. But apparently, if you stand on the top of it, you can see all the way to the other side of Ireland, and it's suggested that Queen Maeve, on her prehistoric expedition to steal the brown bull of Chuilleanáin, that she could see the whole thing going ahead of her, the whole journey that she would have to take, that you could see as far as Bluehill. Finding Proteus. Queen Maeve, standing on the top of Tusk, could see her way as far as the plain of Louth at the start of her great raid. Harder to get back home, as the traveller found. Harder to look back, still harder to answer them, those cries from far away, from the rock in the salty gulf, where nobody hears them, but they howl as loud as Judas. I searched for Dr. Proteus. I found her, but, oh, don't ask me for it now. I'm killed with a lot of you, says the voice climbing. She spotted a crotch in the rocks where she could maybe see further again. If she'd give me a chance, I might be able to guess the beginning and how everything arranges around it, my history and the bits that don't belong. Up there, Dr. Proteus, hanging, holds the perspective glass. But how through all her changes and her daft excuses, how to change it, how to tear it from her hand. The writer Maria Edgeworth, who was one of the most celebrated people of her day, lived to be very old, and she was still working at the end of her life. She was still writing, and she sold stories and used the money for famine relief. But she also, because she was so celebrated, people who knew her in America, people who had travelled to see her in her lifetime, sent food to help the starving people, when, of course, the government in London thought that would be a very bad idea, bad economics. So in the memoir that was written by her stepmother, actually, but her stepmother was a lot younger than her. She was the fourth stepmother. Frances Edgeworth wrote about this moment. She was touched by the generosity of the porters who carried the rice and India meal to the vessels for shipment to Ireland in the famine, refusing all payment. And she knit with her own hands a woolen comforter for each porter of bright and pretty colours, which she sent to a friend to present to the men, who were proud and grateful for the gifts, but alas, before they received them, those kind hands were cold and that warm heart had ceased to beat. So this is the poem is called Maria Edgeworth in 1847, and it's an attempt to imagine not just her, but if the porters themselves, as many of them were in fact Irish emigrants, how they might have felt about it. Anger, work, confusion, what is to be done? The Atlantic in the wane and the news getting worse. Work stretching to occupy every hour in the day, carrying back and forth, lifting, bearing and setting down. We are in the centuries when work told the body how to lift, fasten and drag. The weight of the world needed easing. When the horses staggered and slowed on the steep hill, the coach too full, too heavy to drag onwards, they stopped fearfully, and the child from the cabin was waiting for his chance. He ran out with a stone, pushed it behind the wheel so the horses could breathe, and waited for the farthings flung from the passengers' windows. Now he is carrying sacks of meal to the boat, back and forth, loaded then free, and the work stretching ahead, like the road, where at the same moment Maria Edgeworth walks out, her young servant beside her, carrying the basket that gets a bit lighter at every cabin door. This is her work now at the end of her life. At home, she sits down to the story she is writing, line after line, her hand straying back and forth across her remaining pages. The child from the cabin is a man carrying meal to the docks, and at last the day is over and time for him to be paid. But he is too angry, his colleagues are too angry to take money for helping to feed starving people. And she, who is not ever recorded as being angry, takes out her knitting needles and the long skeins of wool the women have spun in the cabins to make a warm comforter for every man, her needles twitching back and forth until the work is done. She is famous and fortunate. She will be remembered. Like the girl whose brothers were turned into swans, she does what she knows, the long scarves piling softly beside her chair, one after the other, like the days. They are far from home when her gift reaches them, the trace of their work unraveling like a worn thread of wool, their kindness out of anger stretching across the sea and answered. Now, I read one which is, again, it's a new one, and I haven't read it before, so this is an experiment. And it's about how, when you start thinking back about in memory, and the memories, it seems to me, just arrive like creatures coming to the light. For that let me rear that. Come out, I say, and you all come to the light. I look for her, she's there. The sunlight glancing up from the shining leaves wavers on her face as she consults the rosebush, the light moving in slow time with her hair. At the end of the garden, where the tall trees shiver, the river's in spate. We walked down there at dawn to get rid of the noise of the night's debate, leaving the table with the bottles and empty glasses, Socrates and his fate in Phaedo, in the great books of the World edition on thin Bible paper laid open. We left them to look at the swelling river, rushing to Ascaton, the tall Desmond Castle by the bridge and the friary downstream in their desolation. We turned back. We had to wash the glasses and arrange the room before her parents rose up. She stopped to consult the rosebush, and the sun rose up in its ranges. Her face shone green in the glancing light, I remember, across all the changes. And that they had arrived in the dark, the small, shy moths, lined up, wings packed tight, crowded under the lamp that still shone emptily, recalling the hours of night.